Round the World Lit Audio. The Stranger by Albert Camus. Part 1. Chapter 1. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week. Free to listen. Book introduction. Today we begin our second book, The Stranger, by Albert Camus. Published in France in 1942. Translated into English by Matthew Ward, and widely considered one of the most important novels of the 20th century. Le Monde, the French newspaper of record, ranked it number 1 on its list of the 100 best books of the century. This is the story of Meursault, a young French Algerian living in the city of Algiers, in the early 1940s. He is a clerk. He lives alone. He has a girlfriend named Marie, and a neighbor named Raymond. He is, by every outward measure, an ordinary man. And then, one afternoon on a sun-bleached beach, he shoots a man he barely knows 4 times, for reasons he cannot explain, even to himself. The trial that follows is not really about the murder. It is about the way Meursault lives, his indifference, his refusal to pretend, his inability to perform the emotions that society expects of him. It is about whether a man can be condemned not for what he did, but for who he is. Camus called his philosophy absurdism. What he meant by this was simple. The universe is indifferent to human beings. It does not care what we do, what we feel, or how we suffer. And the only honest response to this indifference is to acknowledge it, not with despair, but with clarity, to live without illusion, to be, as Meursault is, exactly what you are. This is a short novel, spare, precise, and cold in the way that a very bright light is cold. It illuminates everything and comforts nothing. It will take 11 weeks to complete, 1 chapter at a time. All you need to do is listen. Part 1. Chapter 1. Mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. Those are the first 2 sentences of this novel. 12 words. In 12 words, Camus tells you everything you need to know about Meursault, and everything that will destroy him. Not that his mother died, that he doesn't know when, that the difference, to him, is not important enough to investigate. Part 1. Chapter 1. Meursault received a telegram from the old people's home in Monde, a small town outside Algiers, where his mother had been living for the past 3 years. The telegram read, "Your mother passed away. Funeral tomorrow. Yours sincerely." It told him nothing he didn't already know would happen eventually. He asked his employer for 2 days off. His employer seemed reluctant, as though the death of a mother were a personal inconvenience Meursault was inflicting on the office. Meursault noted this without resentment. It simply seemed like the kind of thing employers do. He borrowed a black tie and an armband from a friend named Emmanuel. Then he took the 2 o'clock bus to Monde. The journey took 2 hours. He sat by the window and watched the countryside pass, flat fields, the occasional cluster of buildings, the road cutting through everything with the indifference of a road. He was tired. He had not slept well. The sun came through the window and he dozed against the glass. He arrived at the home in the late afternoon. The director met him at the entrance. He was a small man with a formal manner, and the slightly apologetic tone of someone who delivers bad news professionally. He expressed his condolences. He mentioned some administrative details. He offered to show Meursault to the mortuary where his mother's body had been placed. Meursault said yes. They walked through long corridors that smelled of floor wax, and something underneath the floor wax that the floor wax was meant to cover. The director walked slightly ahead, speaking over his shoulder about the home's policies, the arrangements for the following day, the other residents who had known Meursault's mother. Meursault followed and said little. The mortuary was a small bright room, at the end of a corridor. His mother's coffin was already there, closed, for metal stands held it at waist height. The walls were white. The ceiling light was strong and shadowless. A caretaker, a small man with a large nose, and a manner of excessive sympathy, offered to open the coffin so that Meursault could see his mother. Meursault said no. The caretaker seemed surprised. Then he seemed to decide not to be surprised, the way people do when they encounter something they don't understand, and would rather not examine too closely. He brought coffee instead. Meursault drank it gratefully. It was good coffee, strong and hot. He noted this. The coffee was good, with the same attention he gave to everything else in the room. He sat in the mortuary with his mother's closed coffin until the evening. Several of his mother's friends from the home came to sit with them, a small group of old people, who arrived quietly and took seats along the wall, as though attending a performance they had seen before. They sat in their chairs, and looked at the coffin and occasionally at Meursault, who sat and drank coffee, and looked at the coffin too. There was an old man among them called Thomas Paris, who the director had mentioned was particularly close to his mother. The director had said, with a small smile, that was meant to be warm, that the other residents joked that Paris and Meursault's mother were engaged. Paris had large ears and watery eyes and he cried. quietly and continuously, for most of the night. Meursault watched him cry without feeling anything in particular about it. This did not seem strange to Meursault. He was tired. His legs ached from the journey. The light in the room was very bright and the night outside was very dark and the coffee was good, and he was tired. He dozed in his chair, woke, dozed again. The old people around him were mostly silent. One of them, a woman with a swollen face and a nervous habit of sucking at her lips, watched Meursault steadily for a long time. He met her gaze and she looked away. At some point in the night the caretaker said, "She went peacefully." He said it in the tone of someone offering comfort, though it was not clear to Meursault that this information changed anything. The hours passed. Outside, the night moved from black to the deep blue that comes before morning. The birds in the garden started up, first one, then several, then many. A sound that was not pleasant exactly but was alive in a way the room was not. Meursault stood and stretched. His back hurt. His eyes were dry. He finished the last of the coffee, which was cold now but still tasted like coffee, and he stood by the window and looked at the garden. He was not thinking about his mother. He was not thinking about her. He was thinking about the birds, and the color of the sky, and the fact that his back hurt, and the coffee. He was simply there, present in the room, not performing grief, not suppressing it, simply existing, the way he existed everywhere, with the same flat attention to the physical facts of wherever he happened to be. This, Camus understood, was what the world would not forgive him for. The morning came properly, the sky went white and then pale yellow, and then the specific bright hot blue of an Algerian summer morning. The old people from the home went back to their rooms. Thomas Perez disappeared somewhere, still weeping quietly, his large ears very red. The caretaker prepared the arrangements for the burial. The procession was to leave at 10 o'clock. Walking from the home to the church in the village, and then to the cemetery. It was already warm. By 10 o'clock, it would be hot. By noon, on the road to the cemetery with no shade, it would be the kind of heat that enters your skull and sits there. Meursault was given a cup of café au lait with bread and butter for breakfast. He ate it in a small room off the main hall, with an orderly who sat across from him and said nothing. The bread was fresh. The butter was cold. He ate carefully and thoroughly. The director appeared to explain the arrangements once more. The priest would lead the procession. The pallbearers were arranged. Thomas Perez would walk beside the coffin as far as his legs would carry him. He was old and not well, and would likely fall behind. But the director said this was understood and expected. Meursault listened and nodded. At 10 o'clock the procession began. The coffin was brought out into the courtyard. The sun was already harsh. The light hid everything without modesty. The white walls of the home, the gravel of the courtyard, the black suits of the pallbearers, the priest's white vestments. Everything was very bright and very flat. They walked. The road to the church was paved, and ran through open ground without trees. The heat came up from the road as well as down from the sky. Meursault walked behind the coffin and felt the heat on the top of his head, and the back of his neck. His feet hurt. The road was hard and his shoes were not made for walking. He watched the ground passing under his feet, and thought about shade. He thought about water. He thought about how many kilometers it was to the cemetery. He did not think about his mother. This is not coldness. Or rather, it may be coldness, but it is not dishonesty. Meursault does not perform. He does not manufacture feelings he does not have. The sun was hot and his feet hurt, and these were the facts of his experience at that moment, and Meursault was a man who dealt in facts. Thomas Perez walked beside the coffin for the first kilometer, and then began to fall behind. Meursault watched him as he struggled to keep pace. The old man's face was very red and his steps were uneven, and he kept stopping to wipe his eyes, and then hurrying to catch up, only to fall behind again. Eventually he cut across a field to reach the cemetery by a shorter route, appearing at the gate just as the procession arrived, his face streaming and his legs trembling. Meursault noted this with a clarity that was close to compassion but was not, exactly, compassion. It was simply observation. Perez was suffering. Meursault could see this. He did not look away from it. The burial was brief. The priest said the words. The coffin was lowered. The earth was thrown. The sound of earth on a coffin lid is a specific sound, dull and final and not at all like any other sound. Meursault heard it. He stood at the edge of the grave in the hot sun, and heard the earth go down. Then it was over. The procession dispersed. The old people from the home went back. The priest left. The pallbearers left. Meursault shook the director's hand, thanked him for everything, and walked back to the bus stop. On the bus back to Algiers he fell asleep almost immediately. His head tipped against the window and the countryside moved past outside, and he slept, deeply, without dreaming, the way a person sleeps when they have been awake all night, and there is nothing left to keep them awake. He arrived in Algiers in the evening. He went home. He washed his face. He went to bed. He slept. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening, the cafes filling up, the trams running, the harbor lights coming on one by one over the dark water. The city had no particular feelings about any of this, and neither did Meursault, and this, for the time being, was enough. Tomorrow he would go back to work. Chapter Transition. You have reached the end of Part 1, Chapter 1 of The Stranger, by Albert Camus. In Chapter 2, Meursault returns to Algiers. He goes swimming. He meets a woman named Marie, whom he knew slightly from work, and they spend the day together. He takes her to see a comedy film. He brings her home. His mother was buried yesterday, or the day before. He is not entirely sure. Chapter 2 is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new chapter arrives every week.